Hey everybody, this is Seth.
And this is Becky.
Here's the deal. We are back in the lab retooling the podcast.
We're so excited to make all kinds of great new changes and relaunch in January with a brand new show.
We think you're really going to like it, but until then, we didn't want to leave you with nothing. So here's what we're going to do.
We're going to pull out of the archives some great interviews we've done in the past.
Here's one of those interviews.
Check. 1, 2, 3.
The D.
Brief.
This is the D brief.
Your guide to Detroit.
Your guide to Detroit's arts
and entertainment scene.
This is the D.
Brief.
Hello and welcome to Detroit's Arts and Entertainment Podcast. I am one of your co-hosts. My name is Seth Resler. The rest of the crew is off this week. We will be back next week with a brand new episode for you. But we didn't want to leave you hanging, so I wanted to share with you an interview that I did about this very special event that is coming up real soon. It happens every year in October here in Detroit. It is, of course, Theater Bazaar, the annual Halloween masquerade party that happens at the Masonic Temple. It's coming up the weekends of October 12th and 13th, as well as October 19th and 20th, and this is pure decadence. Everybody gets dressed up, and you go through the dozens and dozens and dozens of rooms at the Masonic Temple. It's kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure game. And so I had an opportunity to sit down with the creator of the whole thing, John Dunivant, and here's my conversation with him. Hope you enjoy it. Well, thank you so much for sitting down and taking the time to talk to me. I really appreciate it. I know you're not getting any sleep. You're working hardcore because this event is coming up in just a few weeks.
Yeah.
Theater Bazaar. And I have never been because I've only been a Detroit resident for a couple years now. So for people who haven't been to the event, how do you describe what happens?
That is probably the hardest thing to do because there's no touchstones to say this is like this or that. I mean, beyond saying it's like Eyes Wide Shut meets Cirque du Soleil, but it's the greatest masquerade on earth, and it's a massive immersive art installation on an unprecedented scale. There's nothing else like it in the world. It's a choose your own adventure, and it's absolutely amazing.
So let's talk about a couple of the things that it's not like, because it's not a haunted house.
Not at all.
I mean, it's got elements in that. It's got costumes and actors.
Costumes, characters, but that's like comparing an opera to a haunted house because there's costume characters.
Right.
And it's set in Halloween, but I use Halloween and kind of old American folk art and pagan symbols and things like that. It's part of it, but it definitely doesn't make it a haunted house.
And this takes place in the Masonic Temple.
Yeah, the Detroit Masonic Temple, which is the world's largest. And we're not using their stages. We're using areas the public is normally never allowed into.
Right.
We take over 350,000 square feet of space and completely transform it.
And this building, for people who haven't been in it, is amazing because it's just, there's so many rooms and there's so many places to go. And it's, you mentioned Eyes Wide Shut, and that's what I was thinking of when I toured that facility. So I can only imagine that it's a fantastic place to do this event.
Oh, it was when we had the opportunity. I couldn't believe we had the opportunity to actually get into this building to do what we're doing to it. And even then, the first year that we did it, I was, just because where we came from, working for 10 years to build the amusement park we built, and then getting caught and having all of that shut down and taken away and have to be destroyed. I didn't want to go through that experience again. And then knowing that going into the Masonic, I'm basically taking the mystique of the building and the iconography of the Masons and the idea of secret societies and playing with it as a narrative. And I knew that could be touchy for them as well. So every step I was showing them concept art and drawings and blueprints and things that we were planning just so they were aware, because I didn't want it taken away again. But yeah, it's crazy to be. I mean, as a student of architecture, I've never seen a building like it. I mean, it's the fact that on the 6th floor is a full stone cathedral built by the Knights Templars. I mean, what buildings have that? It's normally you get to the 6th floor, it's just more office buildings and or office rooms or whatever. And it's like, it's crazy.
Well, I want to come back to the history and some of the things that you have mentioned that have happened in this event. But before we do that, if I were to buy my ticket online today what happens in terms of the experience? Because you got to plan ahead a little bit if you're attending this event, right? So, because I would come in costume.
For sure.
Do you have recommendations in terms of what you suggest people come in?
It depends on what night you come. The Friday nights on October 12th and the 19th that's our formal masquerade. So that night has more rules to the costume. It's more, obviously it's formal. It's like black tie, ball gown. A lot of women will dress in Elizabethan or Victorian gowns and corsets and big feathery masks, and guys will be in top hats and tails and masks or in military garb or historical garb. But it leans towards the formal. There's which also adds to the event, and the fact that everyone is dressed in a similar fashion within this environment only brings the experience to life. Saturday, costumes are mandatory, but it could be anything and everything, although people have been picking up on the design aesthetic that is established, as well as, we have a limited color palette. The colors of the events are based around autumn. It's all golds and ambers and little hints of greens and reds and obviously black and orange. There are no blues or purples ever in our event. So some people are pulling from that, and the blend of this secret society and circus it's a fun juxtaposition, and by doing that, it only adds more to the event, but it also puts a lot of pressure on people. So it's not like you have to do that. But it's generally not people showing up in some off the shelf SpongeBob and sexy nurse costume. It's there's a lot more to it. And there are some amazing costumes. And not only, we're working on the event starting in January all year long, but there are some people that they start their costumes right after the party this year. And I wish we could have the chance to focus on costumes like that, but the people do. So they fill in that side of it. And that is one of the coolest things about this, is seeing the creativity that everyone else is bringing to it, because we're creating a world, but worlds can't be created, excuse me, in a vacuum. So the fact that they're bringing their own experiences and their own take on this world to it is it's the coolest. But I would also, no matter what, wear comfortable shoes. It is massive. It's large. It's a get there early and come with some stamina. A lot of parties, people like to, pre-party. They'll all get together, the group, have some drinks. I also don't recommend that, because this is an endurance test, and it's not something that, it's not like a normal Halloween party where it doesn't matter if you really remember all the parts. You want to experience it and remember it because of just what you're about to take on.
Uh-huh. So then I show up at the Masonic Temple and enter, and walk me through what happens then, both on the Friday and the Saturday night events.
Well, the Friday and the Saturday are very different in the layout. The Friday is more curated. So when you enter on Friday, you're entering into the main lobbies, and you both nights you enter in the main lobbies. But on Friday, everyone kind of gathers in the main lobby as some drinks are being served and performers are kind of revolving around you. And as the crowd kind of fills in, we gather everyone up into a parade and then head down into the grand ballroom where the Theater Bazaar Orchestra kicks off the night. We built our own 12-piece orchestra to write original music to score the entrance to this event. Swing dancers are dancing all around as dinner is served and tables are set with mountains of jack-o'-lanterns and candelabras and apothecary jars spilling vintage candies. It's magical and decadent. There's burlesque and boylesque and sideshow on stage backed by the orchestra. Fire performers are juggling over your head. Then a marching band storms the room, and we all gather into a New Orleans-style funerary parade and head up into the other 7 floors of the building, where you're essentially getting this curated, guided journey through all the highlights that we have to offer for the evening. So you're guaranteed to see some very specific shows and see them on time. Whereas on Saturday, it's a crapshoot, but it's part of the fun. Saturday, all 8 floors are open simultaneously for 9 hours straight. So it is a choose your own adventure on a massive scale. Once you enter, once the main floor opens up, or the doors are released in a way you can go anywhere and everywhere, and there'll be things happening in every room, and wherever you go, you'll probably see something that you've never seen before. It's there's a train ride on the 7th floor. There's an ice cream parlor with soda jerks handing out custom alcoholic ice creams themed to the event. There's a movie theater playing turn of the century horror and erotica in a nonlinear way, like memories of the building being played back as popcorn girls are throwing popcorn and ushers vacuum under your feet and tell you to be quiet. There's 6 main stages, 21 performance spaces, but then every hallway and every lobby can become an impromptu theatrical experience. There's hidden rooms and secret bars for you to try to discover. It's overwhelming. It's hard to describe.
How many people are involved in this production?
I couldn't tell you. We've never really counted up until this year. We started counting some aspects of it, and we're realizing that we're not a production company. We're not. We never set out to run a production or run any kind of event type of thing. It was just more of trying to create an art installation and something that no one has ever seen before. But at this point, essentially by a group of amateurs, we've created the largest production that's in North America. There's nothing like this in New York or Vegas or anything. We blow away every single other show in terms of scale because we don't know the limits. That was the thing you had mentioned, TED Talks. I mean, that was part of what I was trying to poorly convey in my fumbled speech was just the fact that this is essentially a group of amateurs creating the largest production this country has ever seen. And like I had mentioned before about the popcorn girls and the ushers just in the movie theater, but we did a count on how many of these, and just the ancillary characters, the characters that, because you're meant to enter this world and everything is kind of taken care of for you in some ways, like the elevator operators and the ticket takers and the just these characters that almost disappear into the environment. There are 700 of them scattered throughout the building. Jeez. And that's just the background characters.
Are these all volunteer? Are they paid?
To a degree. Some of the volunteers, like we have like the budget for this party is $1 million, and if we were even to pay like just the background characters $100 a piece, it'd be $700,000, right, and would wipe us out. So for the most part, those characters are volunteers. They get tickets to the show or they get other things. Some of them get paid to a degree. But then we also have a massive staff of crew, then they get paid. We have over 80 managers that are handling, and even the managers are spread thin, handling multiple departments. Can you talk about some of your key players in putting all this together? Myself, I design every aspect of it, everything from signage and designing the sets, and then breaking down the sets into blueprints, and then laying them out and building and painting them, to the costume design and even just the restroom signs, like every aspect. And then there's my cousin, who's my partner in this, is production manager and on-site manager. There's Casey Miller, who is our overall stage manager, but we have multiple stages, so there's a stage manager for every stage, and he oversees all of them, communicating with them and then getting them communicating with everyone else. There's a tech manager who just oversees all the cables. We rent over 30 miles of cable to run through the building. We can't use any electrical in the building because it would fry the circuits. It was built in the 20s. So now, this building was not designed to do what we do to it. They even actually changed Masonic law to allow for us to do what we're doing in this building, which is crazy. So, but they have their main stage where they do their big productions. There's a power unit there where we have to run cables from one spot and then run it through all these back hallways and stairwells and dumbwaiters and run 30 miles of cable. And that's the big cable. That's not even just like getting into the extension cords and all the other stuff that extend from that, but it's massive. And then there's a team that just runs cable. But then you have teams, like I was saying about, there's a stage manager for all the different stages, but every single room is almost like its own club. There's a sound controller, the stage manager, there's a lighting director, there's for every room. And then they have an overall lighting guy, their overall sound department. And there's a full costume department where we're dealing with, just like I said about the 700 costumes. Those all are handmade and all have to be fitted every year to people that have either changed in weight or a totally new person that hasn't worked there before. Plus, we have our main troupe, our lane performers, where those are kind of our main characters that run through the building. There's a narrative that's happening throughout where there's different territories to the building, and some territories are controlled by devils, other territories are controlled by clowns, and they battle in some areas that they're not allowed in certain areas, and they battle for that. And
that was one of my questions: is how much scripting or blocking or theater, is it improvisational or is
it's improv? I mean, it's designed with a narrative, and then these characters kind of know their. It's the performances are on the stages, but because they're all around you as well, and you're meant to interact with that, you're meant to lose yourself in the anonymity of your costume. You're meant to become a part of the show. So those elements aren't really scripted, and a lot of these characters don't even really speak. Like the devils or the clowns, they're doing. Right. It's a lot of physical theater in a way, and you're meant to be drawn into it. So some things are scripted. There's it's hard to describe, and we have to work in like kind of large brushstrokes because of the size of the crowd.
Yeah,
and it's harder to do a linear script with someone, because if you're only getting part of it and then you move on somewhere else, you'll never really get the payoff, or you'll get the payoff without the setup and not really understand why. So it's kind of a complex, broad stroke type.
So what's happening in these last few weeks before you open it up? Is there, it doesn't sound like, is there like a dress rehearsal, or what are the things that you're working on?
We don't really have dress rehearsals, especially because of the amount of performers and what's going on, and they kind of already know. This is our 8th year. Right now, a lot of final costume fittings, a lot of final costume designs. This costume department is scrambling. Everything bottlenecks right now. This is the worst time of the year for us because we're all spread too thin. A lot of information doesn't come into the last minute. So no matter what, no matter how much we plan for it, no matter like how many years we've been doing this for, it is all bottlenecking and nobody's sleeping, and everything's working around the clock. Like right now, as I said, like the costume department, they're the first ones to move in. They've moved into the building about a month and a half ago. They're in an old handball court that was converted into our costume department. The makeup department has moved in. It's an old gymnasium, and the hair is there. But we have an on-site manager, Brett Carson, who he's been living in the building already for a couple of weeks, living on an air mattress in a back dressing room. This tiny little, 6x6 cube. That's, it's water stained and the paint's chipping, and we're just like, but that's where we live. We take over 2 like towers that surround their main stage that are filled with, it's like, they're about 5 stories tall, and it's a stairwell that goes up the 5 stories on either side, and there's little dressing rooms connected to all of it, because they used to have these massive productions, like the Rockettes were there, or their Broadway shows where you have a cast of 100 people. So there's a lot of these little tiny rooms, and we fill them with air mattresses. And my fiance and I were about to move in this week with an air mattress, and we won't leave till almost November. And crews at this point are going 24/7 just on setup. But we're starting in January and designing and building, and things get built modularly. So that stuff's all pre-built. This is just the installation part of it. Takes these last 2-3 weeks with around-the-clock crews happening on all floors all at once. Like, it's nuts.
How much of it changes from year to year, and what's new this year?
It doesn't. It was like back when we had the amusement park, it was a whole lot easier because we could build things and leave it permanently, and then build a new thing every year and that type of thing. With this, everything has to be built, installed, and then taken out. And so because the narrative of the story is evolving, it's more about evolving the space rather than changing it. So we add, it's rare that we'll take a set and say, okay, we're going to scrap this and do a new one. I mean, it's happened, but for the most part, it's just additions. We just keep adding more and more layers to it because the building, it's 350,000 square feet of space that we're dealing with. So because of that, it's like the first couple of years, everyone was like, oh yeah, this sucks. This is nothing like, the old grounds. It's like, well, yeah, we had 10 years of building that we could do, and now we have to start over from scratch completely. So being able to build up to that point where we can then just add. So this year, additions, there's a stage that's set that I've been trying to build for the last couple of years, but it's been ambitious and taken me forever. There's a set in our asylum. That's the stone cathedral that I was mentioning. A lot of these sets, and the tone in general is kind of inspired by a lot of old 1930s penny arcade dioramas or natural history museum dioramas and the old automatons, as well as early film. I'm a huge fan of George Méliès, who did From the Earth to the Moon, and a lot of the old, he was the very first special effects artist ever. He was a magician who in the late 1800s saw what he could do with illusions with film, and then created these amazing little whimsical shorts that, the classic Earth to the Moon, where you got the rocket in the moon's eye, and all of his sets were absolutely incredible. They were all these flat paneled pieces that it was almost like a giant pop-up book, and so he would build these beautiful visions of hell and have these Faustian devils all dancing through it. So in this cathedral, I'm building this Faustian vision of hell inspired by George Méliès, and it's all these stalagmites growing from the ground and all around you. So the stage will be enveloped in stalagmites, and there's two 27-foot tall goats with swords flanking the stage that we've had already, but they'll be kind of nestled a bit more in this environment. There's a lot of signage and cabinetry and things, as the building's insane, so even directing traffic comes into play. So I build almost like art signs to direct traffic. There's some new rooms we're adding that I can't really say too much about, because what we're adding is we're adding more hidden areas. One area that I can talk about, but I'm not going to tell you where it's at, is we're adding a human absinthe dispenser speakeasy this year. So this is a room you have to try to find, which there will be no signs or anything, and you might just get picked to get, if your costume looks like it would fit a human absinthe dispenser speakeasy, you might just get pulled out by some ghost and taken into a room. But it's essentially throughout the building, a lot of this, the idea of this is decadence. And so we have piles of cornucopias of just, piles of pumpkins and candy jars and candy all spilling out from everywhere. And that theme continues in the absinthe room, but the piles are more, they're green gourds and green pumpkins and cabbage heads and licorice, all black licorice in jars all spread out to kind of reflect the absinthe. And then there's two people laid out in this cornucopia with an absinthe dispenser between them, and then the tubes run from the decanter up through their nose into their stomach and out their mouths, and you get your absinthe dispensed from that, which doesn't actually touch anything in their body. It just freaks you out, and it's just awesome. So and then it's kind of like a little piano bar where there'll be an organist playing the absinthizer, which will be kind of this droning hallucinogenic music while a theremin plays in a little candlelit speakeasy. But that's just hidden, so it should be fun.
Oh. You talked about the amusement park. Walk us through the history of this event and how it's changed over time, even before it got to the Masonic Temple.
Yeah, we started actually 18 years ago. I was throwing, even before that, I was throwing these elaborate Halloween parties. It was just as an artist. At the time, I was in advertising, and I hated advertising. I did well at it, but it's just an awful, soul-sucking experience. And so to blow off steam, I loved building fake environments. And I was also, just struggling as an artist to find a voice. I was painting on the side, doing advertising to pay all the bills, but still trying to find my voice. In the meantime, because I always loved Halloween, I love artificial environments. I like everything from really terrible roadside attraction displays to like Disney World and everything in between. I'm fascinated by it. So I was always building these environments, and I built a few, and it kept getting bigger. And then in the late 90s, I had warehouse space in Detroit where my studio was, and I built a couple of sets for that. And then it got the last one that I did. The space that I had, I was renting close to 7,000 square feet of space, and it was just big warehouse with 16-foot ceilings. And so we brought in about 1,000 trees and then built a cabin in the center of it, and then had trails and a forest. It was wild, because if you got in the middle of it, you felt like you were outside, and you felt like you were in the woods, and we were on the third floor of a warehouse. And it was even like, as the night went on, people were peeing in the woods and stuff. I was just like, wait, this is where I work, man. But I got in a lot of trouble for it. The next day, the building owners were bringing a tour through of people, and there was like a trail of blood and glitter and raw meat and leaves and everything leading right to our party. And they were like, what is happening here? And they're like, you can't do this again, or we're going to kick you out. And that was in 99. And then in 2000, another friend, he was throwing like just big outdoor Halloween bonfires. And then another friend, he was part of doing some haunted type, Halloween parties. And it was just like, we're all helping each other out, and we're all going to everybody's parties. Let's combine forces and build something bigger than we've ever done before. And that first year, we're just going to build a big carnival, and it was going to be the theme, the way I was changing the themes every year. But something about it stuck, and I also realized there was so much potential in this space, and to build out this carnival in a different way, that we scrapped everything, started over, and then kept building. And we started off on 6 lots of land, and we were in a very neglected neighborhood in Detroit. We were surrounded by crack houses, and it was bad. But because it was so neglected, we knew we could do whatever we wanted, and we just kept going with it. And over the course of 10 years, and while the drug wars were escalating, all the houses around us were being firebombed and burning to the ground, which is like, it was just crazy. I mean, we were constant. It was nonstop gunfire every day, all night. There's crazy stories about being held up, or even the guy I mentioned who was in our on-site manager who was in the building already living there. Like, there was one point where he had a guy shot through his window while he was in the car, and then unloaded 6 rounds into his lap, like point blank range. It was like Pulp Fiction, where like every bullet missed him. He pulled up because he was just going to pick up some Cokes and candy bars for us while we were building. And when he pulls up into the back where our shop was, he's like yelling out. He's like, "Guys, I need help." And we're like, "Whatever." And we went over and looked at what happened. And while he's sitting there, he had bullet holes between his legs. Next to him, they were in the dashboard. Like, every single round missed him. And he's a really skinny guy. So we're like, "You're so lucky. You're like, skinny is your superpower." Because it was every shot missed him. Or the night we were, I guess it's jumping the gun. But anyway, it was a bad neighborhood. And so as the houses would burn down, we would just expand the lots and expand our fences. And we ended up taking over 23 lots of land. It was a massive section of this block, and building an amusement park. We had a roller coaster and a Ferris wheel and underground tunnels, a full frontier land. There was like close to 50 flamethrowers and multiple stages, and it was all done to kind of look like an old Dust Bowl era carnival, but it was really based on toys and dioramas that I was speaking of. It was like I always had a fascination where I wanted to shrink down and be small and wander around in these dioramas. So it was that kind of effect. Once you entered, you were shrunk, and everything was looming and large and overscaled because I'm tall. I also wanted things to loom so you feel childlike. You feel almost insignificant. It was kind of a psychological effect I was playing with as you'd enter this world, and it was amazing. And so yeah, for 10 years we ran this illegal theme park, and then as the story goes, the governor found out about it and then called the mayor and was wondering just what it was. The mayor, who was so embarrassed that we'd been building an amusement park for 10 years that no one knew about. It was 18 hours before their doors opened that year. They sent in SWAT teams, the fire marshal, the chief of police, the health department, just like every department came after us and shut us down hard. And so we were kind of left adrift for a bit, and it was move on or die. And there's so many people that are like, oh yeah, the grounds is great. And I was like, yeah, but that'll never happen again. That was a perfect storm of a whole lot of elements that was in old Detroit. Like, Theater Bazaar grew in a way that it could never have grown anywhere else in the world because of the fact that it was so neglected. It was also a group of people that have growing up in this area, the kind of the sense of lawlessness, but it was also the sense of the DIY attitude. It was just everybody's doing it yourself. Everybody's, the whole line of Detroit hustles harder. Everybody's hustling and everybody's, coming together as a community to build something larger than greater than the sum of its parts, and just willing to throw everything at it. And we did. And this grew from that. And to even have the chance to have like the world's largest Masonic Temple. Like, if you were to pull this production off in New York, it would be crushed under the weight of the expense.
So after the city breaks it up, does it move right into the Masonic Temple, or how did that happen?
That night, because we only had 18 hours, luckily, like we knew we needed to throw a party. Like, at that point, I was trying to, like, we spent almost every dime we had on the party, had a few $1,000s left over. At the time, we called a lawyer, and we were just like, what should we do? She advised, because this is old Detroit, she advised me to bribe the fire marshal. I'd never bribed anyone before, so that was weird. So I tried bribing the fire marshal, and he was like, yeah, this comes from the mayor. I'm like, okay, well, that didn't work. So now what? So we ended up getting a last-minute meeting with the Fillmore in Detroit, and they said, luckily they didn't have an event on that Saturday, and they weren't going to have an event. They said they'd been running for some time. They wanted to give the crew some time off, but they also saw us come in, and they heard our story, and they were just like, we can't say no. Well, whatever you guys need. And we went back to the grounds, and with a crew, it was a full convoy. We were calling all our friends, anybody that had trucks and or helping hands. And it was like picking a corpse. So that part sucked, but we strip mined everything that we could to take to the Fillmore. We hadn't slept at this point in 3 days because we were finalizing. We don't sleep anyway while we're working around the clock finalizing for the party. And everyone, we took everything we had, and in 18 hours transformed the Fillmore and threw a party. And it was not at all what the party could have been, especially that year. We had expanded that year more than ever, and that's also, it was heartbreaking because so many people didn't get to see what we did. It was like what we built that year was absolutely amazing, and no one got to experience it, and we had to tear so much of it apart to pull off the Fillmore. But the Fillmore was a Band-Aid. It wasn't. We were like, this is not a normal stage show. There's only one stage at the Fillmore. There's no room for exploration and choose your own adventure, and that was what we were about. So we struggled for months trying to figure out where to go and what to do, and whether or not even to continue. But then we had an opportunity to be in the Masonic, and so we seized it because the building's amazing. And
I'm trying to put this in the timeline because I know that the Masonic was in some trouble at one point, yes, right? And Jack White came in and helped save this. Was this before or after that?
This was before Jack White. There wasn't a lot of things happening at the Masonic at the time. They were drowning in debt. They were, they had owed back taxes. They weren't getting the productions that they are now. They weren't getting the weddings and all of the different things that are happening at this point. And they brought in Blair, this guy who runs the Crowfoot in Pontiac, to help produce some of the shows to try to bring some life back to the Masonic. Blair saw there was a documentary happening that where they were filming us about what happened at the grounds. He saw that and he said, you need to bring in Theater Bazaar, and they're going to do amazing things in your building. And they reluctantly agreed because they thought we were all crazy and we were all a bunch of outlaws that just got busted by the cops, and we we had quite the reputation. So they were frightened, but they agreed. And now, like, we had, like, the historian was just like, we were breathing new life into this building. There were so many of them that had really got it, and they see the respect that we have for the building. And even though it is, in some ways, I'm kind of mocking the symbology of it all and that, but but that's just what I do with my art. Like, I try to break down symbols and try to, for good and for bad. So playing with these sensitive things, I mean, these, they're holding this, obviously this is a very personal thing that they're doing. So that was why I was afraid a little bit to show them what I was doing, but I knew I had to, because I didn't want to, like, set it all up and then 18 hours before doors have them shut us down because they're like, what are you doing to this building? But no, they've been amazing to allow us to do it.
You talked about some of your influences as an artist, and even before we started recording, you were talking about how you were a Star Wars fan. Can you talk about, whether it's Star Wars or some of the other influences on this event?
Well, Star Wars, that was my very first influence. I did not, my parents were never really about the arts or supportive of the arts, but when I saw Star Wars, I was 6 years old in 1977, and it blew my mind, and I realized even then how much this is going to change my life, and I obsessed about it, and I didn't even really understand the arts and what movie making, especially then, was just magic. And then 3 years later, The Empire Strikes Back comes out, and my next door neighbor got The Art of The Empire Strikes Back, and it's a book filled with concept art by Ralph McQuarrie and Joe Johnston and all the artists that created Star Wars. And that book, I realized what that book held, and I traded like a ton of toys. Like, I traded like so much stuff just for this book. And I still have that book to this day. Like, the binder is destroyed. I had to have it rebound years ago. Like, that book taught me everything. Like, it shows you, like, from the process of art, like the thumbnail sketches that they would do to the studies and the building up to the composition to the final pieces. Like, it showed every step of the way, and it taught me design and concepting. It taught me how to creation. It was like the most amazing thing in the world. And then it's still, like, my parents, they would never, I don't know, like I said, I don't know if they've ever even been to the DIA. Like, that wasn't around me. And so I got all of that from Star Wars.
We were talking about the DIA earlier too, and you said you were almost involved in the exhibit that's been there all summer with the costumes.
Yeah.
Can you tell that story? Or
Sure. That was because we do Theater Bazaar. Excuse me. Theater Bazaar is, it's an immersive art installation, and knowing that we have the crew to be able to build these sets, and because I'm a big Star Wars nerd, so for May the 4th, May the 4th be with you, decided to, in the bar connected to our workshop where we build all the sets for Theater Bazaar, decided to transform that into Mos Eisley Cantina and make our own, like, Star Wars set experience. But the friend of mine that I do this with is Dan Land, who is also a Kresge Fellow. So we're both Kresge Fellows and have some respect within the arts. So the DIA knew this. They knew that we're both Kresge Fellows, and knowing that we're way into Star Wars and we can pull this off, they asked us to take the DIA and turn the entire DIA into a Star Wars theme park, which was incredible. And they had a massive build budget for us, a bigger build budget than we'd ever seen before, specifically just for building. And so we took the concepts of that and then created a narrative of why Star Wars would be involved in a museum. And the concept was to basically, there's a lot of trends in museums lately, like museum takeovers. We wanted to take the takeover thing quite literally and make it a full imperial occupation. And and we were hanging giant red, imperial, very Nazi-esque flags on the building. We had turrets and imperial checkpoints. And then in the DIA, when they first saw it, they're like, this is a gut punch. And it's like, it's supposed to be a gut punch. This is not supposed to be an easy thing. And it's art. Art shouldn't be easy. And it should make you feel really uncomfortable, because we're trying to, just like it happened in Germany when the Nazis came in and what they did to these institutions and these museums, and they just strip mined them of the art, and art was taken to be destroyed or censored, or some art was taken for the personal collection of these Nazis. We wanted to draw that parallel with the Imperials at all these checkpoints. There was transports, and we were taking art off the walls or having art wrapped in black cloth with labels saying this art is being censored for your protection under the order of the Empire, or this art is being taken for the personal collection of the Emperor. And so you could have these conversations with kids about what happens in these circumstances. And then in the center of it, in Prentice Court, which is kind of the center of the DIA, we turned that into a rebel base and had spaceships parked there. And it was the cafeteria became kind of the mess hall for the Rebel Alliance, and so we could have this space where, as I said, it's like in the heart of the DIA, a rebellion is growing, and we can recruit these kids to join the rebellion. And it was amazing. And we worked 4 months on it, and it was an intense design. I mean, it was fueled by passion, because Dan and I were just like, holy crap, we get to design this large scale Star Wars installation. And then 4 months into it, they realized that this budget they had was all a computer model, and the money didn't actually exist. And so the entire project was cut, and that was heartbreaking, because I think it would have probably been the most powerful thing we could have been involved with.
Now the rebellion squashed by budget cuts.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Well, let me ask you one more thing about Theater Bazaar. Zombo.
Yeah.
Tell me about him.
Zombo is our god. There was, when I was saying about the original grounds, the grounds itself were not meant to be, the historically accurate carnival. It was a diorama. So when you entered the grounds, I was telling you, I had background in architecture and studied specifically cathedral architecture and the psychological effects of a cathedral. So when you enter the grounds, it was like entering a cathedral, and the sense when you enter a cathedral is to look up and feel humbled. It's designed to make you feel that way. So this was designed to make you feel that way, but this god was this puppet maker, the toy maker who's made these dioramas, but there was also this manifestation of this god is Zombo, and Zombo that's just his name at the time. He's the oldest god. He's like, Uranus and Kronos and the gods that gave birth to the gods and then eat their own children. He's a bastard, egotistical, wanton god who just happens to take on the form of a clown at this time. But he hates clowns, so he wears this death mask face to kind of mock clowns, to say death to all clowns. And he's, as I said, a wanton god who doesn't really care, and he oversees everything. And so the part of the secret society and the narrative that we've created within the Masonic is using, the lore of the sacred geometry of the Masons, where you can open portals. So we're using that to open these portals to this dark carnival we built before, and to draw out Zombo, as well as his minions and all his little lesser demons, and to throw some. I mean, you would think that all the best parties have got to be in hell. So this is like kind of drawing parallels to that. So, well,
I know you haven't been getting much sleep, and you're probably not thinking much past this year's event. But what do you think the future holds for Theater Bazaar?
It's always hard to say. I mean, that's it's we were kind of saying it before, but it was when we were talking about. It's such a fragile construct. It is like we're still not sustainable. We really thought and really hoped that if we could go to 2 weekends, it would help extend the sustainability a little bit. But it didn't really work out in kind of the ways we were hoping. It sort of split the crowds, and it's not financially sustainable. So we're not really sure. We're just trudging along, but 18 years into it, this is a young man's game. We're all getting old, and this is hard. It's hard on our bodies, physically, mentally. It's I've got kids, so we even have to give up our kids for almost a month just so we can put this thing on. So the strain of it is insane, as well as just how much it should cost versus what it does cost. And even though it costs about $1 million now, it should cost $3 million at least. And so there are even slight things can be devastating to us, shifts and whatever, that we get over the hump out of passion and drive, but I don't know. And, still trying to come up with game plans when this whole thing
So what we're saying
dies.
is people should come out and see it.
Yes.
And if they want to, how do they do that?
You can get them at Noir Leather in Royal Oak. There's Volta Midnight in Detroit, Ann Arbor, and Grand Rapids. There's Leon and Lulu in Clawson, which is the only place where you can get gala tickets, the Friday night tickets.
Okay.
There's also Three Ring Apothecary in Hamtramck. There's Armageddon Beach Party in Detroit. There's more. There's a list online, as I said. You can find out there and go there and get them.
Awesome.
Get them soon.
Well, John, thank you so much for that. I know you're really, really busy right now, so I really appreciate you taking the time to tell us about it and explain all of it. And, good luck with it.
Thank you.
And, good luck with getting some sleep once it's all done.
Yeah, we sleep in November.
Well, thank you
Sleep
very
when
much,
we're dead.
John.
Thank you.
The D Brief.
Your guide to Detroit's arts and entertainment scene.